Session 106. We continue with Genesis 41. So after Joseph, the young Hebrew man from the prison, told Pharaoh exactly what his dreams meant and what is going to happen to all the world and especially to Egypt, he continued to say to Pharaoh, verse 31, "And the plenty shall not be known in the land by reason of the famine that is going to follow, for it shall be that severe." And because the dream was repeated to Pharaoh twice, it is because this thing is established by Elohim, and Elohim will shortly bring it to pass. He was just confirming to you the fact that we've always been telling each other that no doctrine in the Bible can be established by only one witness. There always have to be 2 or 3 witnesses for everything in the Bible, of which God himself is the first witness. Then what does Yeshua say about it? What is the apostles and the disciples and eventually the prophets? So all the witnesses must agree on a specific doctrine. We cannot just with one witness establish any doctrine in the Bible. And here it's the same. This specific dream was so important that God repeated it. He gave it to Pharaoh twice. And Joseph confirms that because it was given twice to Pharaoh, that it is indeed from Elohim. Now, therefore, verse 33, let Pharaoh seek for a man discreet and wise, and set him over the land of Mitzrayim, the land of Egypt. Why must he find a discreet man? Why must the man be discreet? Because you can think for yourself, if this man that's going to be in charge of all the richness of the 7 years, if he's going to be in charge of that, he cannot be a corrupt or dishonest man. He must be discreet, he must be honest, he must be loyal and trustworthy, because otherwise he can make himself rich out of all of this, and in the 7 years of famine, there would not be enough to provide for the people. So Joseph says Pharaoh must look for a discreet man and a wise man to set him over the land. Let Pharaoh do this, and let him appoint officers over the land, and take up a 5th part of the land of Mitzrayim in the 7 plentiful years. So of all the crops and all the cattle and everything that is produced in the 7 plentiful years, a 5th part of that must be taken up, 20% of that must be taken up into Pharaoh's storages, so that can be prepared for the 7 years of famine. And let them gather all the food for those good years that come, and lay up corn under the hand of Pharaoh, and let them keep food in the cities. And that food shall be a reserve for the land against the 7 years of famine, which shall be in the land of Mitzrayim, so that the land perishes not through the famine. So that's a very good plan that Joseph had, and we are not sure whether God gave that plan to Joseph, or whether God just gave Joseph the meaning of the dreams. And maybe because Joseph is indeed wise, I mean, he's had a lot of experience, and he's had a lot of time to really become humble and wise, as he's been the best servant in Potiphar's house, and then the best prisoner in the prison guard. He learned a lot of wisdom, and God allowed all that to happen to him so that he can learn a lot of wisdom. And I think God gave him the explanation of the dreams, but that Joseph came up with this plan on his own. And out of his wisdom and out of the experience, and this is what God raised him up for, he gave Pharaoh this plan. So the thing was good in the eyes of Pharaoh and in the eyes of all his servants. And Pharaoh said to his servants, "Can we find such a one as this, a man in whom is the Ruach of Elohim?" It's just amazing. A couple of verses ago, remember, Joseph was explained in chapter 41, verse 12. He was explained and he was described as just a young man, just a Hebrew man, and just a servant of the captain of the guard. Now, in verse 38, Pharaoh says, "There's no other man in whom the Ruach of the Almighty God is than this young Hebrew servant. So it doesn't matter who you are or what you are. When God's Ruach is in you, you can stand up even in the midst of all the wisest and most clever scientists and world leaders. If God's Ruach is really in you, just like Yeshua promised his disciples, when they bring you in front of the synagogues, don't you worry about what you are going to say. Because at that moment, the Ruach will give to you what you will say. And here we can see confirmation, both Old and New Testament. That is how it works. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, seeing that Elohim has shown you all this, there is none so discreet and wise as you are. You shall be over all my house, and according to your word shall all my people be ruled. So you see here that Joseph, from a humble servant just out of prison, just cleanly shaven and just having put on new clothes. I mean, yesterday he was still in prison. He's now put in charge of everything under Pharaoh's hand, all his people. Everyone shall be ruled by Joseph's word. Only in my throne will I be greater than you. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, see, I have set you over all the land of Mitzrayim. And Pharaoh took off his ring from his hand and put it on Joseph's hand, and prepared him a garment of fine linen, and put a gold chain around his neck. And he made him to ride in the second Merkava, what is Merkava again? Chariot that he had. And they cried before him, bow the knee, and he made him ruler over all the land of Mitzrayim. So here we can imagine Joseph. We can imagine what he looked like when he came out of prison. And imagine him a day later. Now he's cleanly shaven, and remember the Hebrew people always had beards. So he was cleanly shaven like an Egyptian. They probably put some makeup on him, like, all those Egyptian pharaohs, they always wore makeup around their eyes. He got all this gold, gold chain around his neck. He probably had some sort of golden crown and beautiful soft linen clothes, and he looked like a sun god. Remember when Joseph's brothers came to Egypt eventually in the famine 7 years to ask for food or to buy food? They didn't recognize him. Now, imagine for yourself, he was about, 18 or 17 something when he was abducted and sent to Egypt. 20 years later, if you don't see your brother or your sister that you've known all your life, and the last time you saw him, he was an adult. He was just below 20 years old. And now 20 years later, you see him again. You are going to recognize him. Because people do change a lot, yes, in 20 years. But not enough between being a baby or being a 7 or 8 year old, yes. And then you see that person only when he's 30 again. You won't recognize him. But if he's already fully grown, if he's already a young man, you will most definitely recognize his face if you see him again in the future. The reason Joseph's brothers didn't recognize him is because he looked like a sun god. If you can think how the pharaohs looked, they had those big golden crowns with that snake on in the front of their crown, and they had this sun disk around their head, and they had all these beautiful clothes and the makeup that's on their faces, and their hair that is shaven off, and they are bald and no beard and all that. So that made Joseph look like a sun god. And when his brothers came into Egypt and they were, quite afraid under this authority of this angry man that's accusing them of being a spy, they were afraid of this ruler of Egypt. Never in their life could they imagine, of course, that this was their own humble little Hebrew brother. But besides that is not written up in the Bible for us just for nothing. It's very important to understand that, because this humble Hebrew young man that is a servant is a prophetic mystery of the Messiah himself, Messiah Yeshua, a humble young Hebrew man, also a servant. He said that he didn't come to this world to be served, but to serve. And he showed that by washing his disciples' feet. He showed that by being obedient to his Father unto death. He showed that by being willing to be sent to his brothers, just like Jacob sent Joseph to look to see if his brothers were all right, remember? Just like Isai sent David to go and look if his brothers were all right when they were fighting against the Philistines. There's so many prophetic symbolism in this. But we'll get to more than that. I just hereby want to confirm that we are looking at Joseph being transformed from a Hebrew man, coming from Hebrew tradition, from Hebrew culture, from the Old Testament culture of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Remember that. Because when Joseph changed and he looked like an Egyptian sun god, it looked like he was no longer Joseph. It looked like he was somebody else. But he wasn't. There was a reason why he had to look like somebody else for a while. But at the end of the day, he restored the house of Abraham. He brought all his brothers and his father back to him, and all 12 tribes were united again. Very important to remember this when we come to the work of Messiah. He is a Hebrew man from a Jewish background, from the tribe of Judah. But for the last 2,000 years, he was preached to the world under the guise of a sun god, because the sun god from the times of Egypt, the sun god Ra, and all the Egyptian sun gods, and all the Assyrian sun god pagan idols, and all the Babylonian idols, and all the Greek idols, and all the Roman idols, all those sun god deities had their birthday on 25 December. All those sun god deities had their mother as being Ishtar or Ashtoreth. And all their sun god worshipping days was on the day of the venerable sun, the Sunday. So for the last 7,700 years, this Hebrew, Jewish-born Messiah were preached to a world under the guise of a sun god tradition. But in the last days, he will reveal himself. I am Joseph, your brother. Yeshua will be revealed as the Jewish Messiah at the end of the day, although their brothers for such a long time just did not recognize him. If the Jews today look at the Jesus that is being proclaimed to them, the Jesus that makes them free from the law, the Jesus that celebrates Sunday, Ishtar, and Christmas, then that Jesus to the Jewish people looks like a sun god, and they're not interested in him. But when the real Jewish Messiah, the Hebrew young man that has been prophesied even in the life of Joseph, if that is revealed to the brothers, then their eyes are opened and they can see Yeshua for who he really is. And that's what happened to Joseph's brothers at the end as well. They saw him for who he really was when he revealed himself to them. Okay, let's continue. So Joseph became ruler over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without you shall no man lift up his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. It's amazing. So nobody can even lift a finger or a toe without Joseph's permission. And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zaphnath Pa'anaha. I hope that pronunciation is right. He called his name Zaphnath Pa'aneha. And he gave him as his wife Asenath, the daughter of Potipharah, priest of On. And Joseph went out over all the land of Mitzrayim. All right, now we have to understand that first of all, remember Joseph is a Hebrew. And the kingdom of Israel is Hebrew, crossed over from Ivrit, from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But here Joseph is mixing his Hebrew blood with Egyptian blood. And we remember that when Israel was eventually brought out of Egypt, thousands of Egyptian people joined them and became part of the nation of Israel. Hereby prophesying in the life of Joseph that although he's mixing with, what is her name, Asenath, and she's the daughter of a priest of On, Potipharah. Sounds very similar to Potiphar, but this is a different Potipharah. He's almost mixing himself into paganism. I know for a fact that he never worshipped any pagan god, and I'm sure that he convinced his wife to start worshipping his god, and she didn't convince him to worship her god. But he's getting mixed up in paganism, he's getting mixed up in sun god worship by marrying a sun god priestess daughter. His name gets changed, he gets makeup on, he gets a new life as the ruler of Egypt, losing all his Hebrew identity, but not losing his Hebrew heritage. Maybe looking like sun god worshipping, but inside he's still a Hebrew. And inside he has always been a Hebrew, and he will be a Hebrew all the way to the end. Just like Yeshua. Although he might be mixed up into every nation, tribe and tongue, and there's different legends being told of him, and everybody sees him in the way that they want to see him, at the end of the day, Yeshua is a young Hebrew man, and he's got a Hebrew inheritance inside of him. And he's got Hebrew culture and legend inside of him, and that is who he is. When you take away all the other doctrines that's built around him, inside he's just still Hebrew, just like Joseph. And Joseph's name was changed to Zabthna Ba'aneha. So this man, Joseph, he's an Hebrew heir with a Gentile name. All right, listen carefully. He's a Hebrew heir. He's going to inherit the Hebrew covenant and promise of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Because remember, his name is Joseph. Do you remember what that means? It means to add. His mother said, a son was added to me. Joseph means to add, to multiply, to bring more, because that is what the house of Abraham is all about. God promised that out of your seed there will be a multitude of people. It will be as the stars of heaven. And in the Egyptian language, his name, Zafnat Bania, means treasury of the glorious rest. He is the one that brings a glorious rest, and he's got a treasury, he's got a treasure cave full of glorious rest. Because in the difficult 7 years, this man, Zafnat Ba'ana, or Joseph in the Hebrew, will bring from his treasury, from the storages where he's going to store up food, he's going to bring up glorious rest. He's going to be able to feed the Egyptian people and his own Hebrew people out of his treasuries. But not only will this be a treasury of glorious rest in the physical of feeding people, but it is also because now both Egypt and the Hebrew people will find rest in Egypt. The rest of the world will suffer. But because of this man, Joseph, Za'afna Ba'ania, this name is so difficult, because of him, there will be an opportunity to at least have glorious rest while the rest of the world is going to suffer. So that makes beautiful sense in terms of the change of his name. And in both, in the Hebrew and in the Egypt, it means abundance. In the Hebrew, Joseph means to add. And in the Egyptian, it means treasury of glorious rest. Just beautiful. Right, Joseph was 30 years old. Do you remember that Yeshua was 30 years old when he started his ministry? When Joseph stood before the Pharaoh, the king of Mitzrayim. And Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and went throughout all the land of Mitzrayim. And in the 7 plentiful years, the earth brought out by handfuls. And he gathered up all the food for 7 years, which was in the land of Mitzrayim. And he laid up the food in the cities, the food of the field, which was all around every city. He laid up the same. All right, I'm going to skip a couple of verses and we come to Joseph's 2 sons. Now, this is again extremely important. So he had 2 boys that his wife bore him. And Joseph called the name of the elder, the firstborn. He called his name Manasseh. For he said, Elohim has made me forget all my toil and all my past in my father's house. Okay, stop a second here. So his firstborn's name is Manasseh, for he said Elohim. So this is, like I said, I don't at all think that although Joseph was totally assimilated into the Egyptian sun god culture, he never went away from Father Elohim. Because even here, now that he's 30 years old and his sons are born, he's still worshipping God, the God of the Hebrews. He's giving his son Hebrew names. Both of his sons are getting Hebrew names, not Egyptian names. And he is giving God the glory because Yahuwah has made him forget all his toil. We need to remember his toil. We talked about how he was, it was horrible for him to be sold by the Midianites. And he longed for his father, and he missed his mother, and he was treated badly as a slave. And then eventually he was thrown in prison. And in both instances, his toil and his character made him rise in stature. But still, he didn't have an easy life, not at all. And he also had a difficult life in his father's house. Although he was the favorite son and he probably didn't have to work as hard as his brothers treated him very poorly. So now that Manasseh is born, he's giving God the glory because he says, Yahuwah is making me forget all my bad things in my past. And that's what Manasseh means. In Hebrew, Manasseh means causing to forget. Causing to forget. This also reminds us that Yahuwah said to Abram and to Isaac and to Jacob, and surely to Joseph over the 20 years that he was being treated so badly, and that he thought maybe God has forgotten me. But now he realized that God hasn't forgotten him at all, and he's put him in power of the most powerful country and land and army of the world at that stage. And his first son's name is Manasseh, causing to forget. Because Yahuwah is not making Joseph to forget about Abram, Isaac, and Jacob, or about the covenants with those men, his forefathers. And Yahuwah hasn't forgotten Joseph at all. This name Manasseh is given in honor of God who made his circumstances change. He was loyal and he endured unto the time that God decided now is the time for me to make you forget the bad things of your past, the toil and the servanthood and prison and the way your brothers treated you. Now there's a new chapter of your life starting. And the name of the second son he called Ephraim. Listen to this, very important. For Elohim has caused me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction. Right, despite being Hebrew by birth, Manasseh and Ephraim were assimilated into pagan society, much like their offspring, the 10 tribes of Ephraim, called the house of Israel. I've spent enough time with you explaining to you the house of Israel, the 10 northern tribes, called the house of Israel, sometimes called the house of Ephraim, and it's very symbolically in Ephraim's life. He had a Hebrew father and an Egyptian mother. He spoke both Hebrew and Egyptian, right? He knew both Hebrew culture and Egyptian culture. He's a Gentile. He's a half-breed. He's a half-mix and mix, or half and half. And that's exactly who and what the 10 northern lost tribes are that got scattered all over the earth. Remember how I taught you Deuteronomy 4 and Deuteronomy 30, how Yahuwah will scatter the house of Israel all over the earth. But in the last days he will regather them. And here the name of Ephraim is because God caused me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction. Everywhere but the land of Israel is basically seen as exile. So whenever Israel was exiled outside of the country of Israel, that is Egypt. It's also symbolically Babylon. Babylon is the mixed religion. Egypt is the land of affliction. Mitzrayim means to be pressed, to be in tribulation. And we know Deuteronomy 4 says that you'll be scattered all over the earth and you'll forget all about me and you'll worship other religions. But if you search for me with all your heart, you will find me. In the last days, during your tribulation, if you obey my voice and do my commandments, then you will remember me and I will gather you again to the land of Israel. That is where we are now. Prophetically, thousands of years before the book of Revelation was ever written, it is prophesied by the children of Joseph. Joseph that is mixed up in something that doesn't look Hebrew anymore, but it's still the Hebrew firstborn of Jacob and his beloved wife, carrying the symbolic meaning of the Messiah. And his seed is going to be mixed up in paganism, mixed up in the rest of the world, not being brought up in the Torah, in the way of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, forgetting all about the ways of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But eventually, Joseph, together with his brothers, will be brought back out of Egypt. They will be taken back to the mountain of Sinai, where the covenant will be confirmed with them again that was given to their fathers Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, where the covenant will be for the first time written down by the hand of Moses, and where Joshua, also symbolic of Yeshua, will take the 12 tribes into the promised land. And this is what we look forward to. Going through the same trials and tribulations as Joseph, being in the land of Mitzrayim, being inside of Egypt, waiting for the 10 plagues of God to fall, to show the Antichrist Pharaoh system that he can no longer enslave us. And then with the hand of Moses, following Moses, obedience to the law of God, we come out by the blood of the Lamb, out of Mitzrayim, out of the land of tribulation, where God has indeed multiplied us. And that is what also the word of Joseph, the name of Joseph means. Remember, Joseph, to add to the seed, to make multiplication of. And Ephraim as well, his name means to be fruitful in the land of my affliction. And now I want to turn to Genesis 48, because when Jacob eventually comes to Mitzrayim, he then blesses Ephraim, and he says, let me just find it, Genesis 48, verse 16, and the angel of God that redeemed me from all evil, bless the lads, and let my name Israel be on them. Let my name be on them, the name Israel, and the name of my father Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And let them grow into a multitude like fish in the midst of the earth. And then verse 19, he also shall become a people. This is now talking of Manasseh. And he also shall be great. But truly his younger brother Ephraim shall be greater than him. And his seed, Ephraim's seed, shall become the fullness of the Gentile nations. Melo ha-goyim. Can you hear how Jacob says, Joseph, I'm blessing Ephraim and Manasseh. Manasseh shall become a big people. But Ephraim, the younger one, his seed shall become the fullness of the Gentile nations. And now you remember Romans 11, where Paul explains to us that the natural branches are broken off because the Jewish people have rejected faith. And the wild branches, the Gentiles, are grafted in onto this tree. And when the time of the Gentiles are fulfilled, then the Jewish people will see that Joseph is their brother, that Yeshua is the Messiah, and their eyes will be opened. And so Paul says, so all of Judah and all of Israel shall be saved, both the house of Judah and the house of Israel that comes from Ephraim, which is mixed up in the rest of the world, which doesn't have true Jewish blood in them. But still, Joseph through Ephraim, Jacob blesses them. In you will be the multitude of the Gentile people. And you carry the covenant made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And my name, Israel, Jacob was changed to Israel. Genesis 48. Let my name be on Ephraim and Manasseh, because the 10 northern tribes is called the house of Israel. They are scattered all over the world into every nation, tribe, and tongue. And they will, in the last days, when they are in tribulation, which is what Mitzrayim means. When they remember God's commandments, they will remember the God of Abraham, and they will return to him, and the fullness of the Gentile nations will come in. We are from the tribe of Ephraim, scattered all over the world, but will in the last days be regathered by the hand of Joseph, which is symbolic for the hand of the Messiah.